My daughter looked me in the eye and said she wanted to make things right. Then she handed me a first-class ticket to paradise. It was meant to be a one-way trip, a perfect plan to get rid of her old man and his inconvenient estate. But she forgot one crucial detail about her father. For 40 years, I was a financial auditor. My entire life was built on one simple principle: numbers don't lie. And hers were screaming fraud. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The silence in the Denver house had become a physical presence since Eleanor passed. It was a heavy, cold quiet that even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall couldn't dent. 3 weeks ago, my daughter Jessica had shattered that quiet. Not with love, but with the sharp, calculating tone of a real estate agent eyeing a prime property. "I just want you to be realistic, Dad," she had said, her voice echoing in the living room that still smelled faintly of Eleanor's rose-scented potpourri. "This house is too big for one person. It's nearly $1 million in equity just sitting here, collecting dust." When I refused, explaining that every wall held a memory I wasn't ready to sell, her carefully constructed compassion crumbled. Her words turned to weapons. I was selfish, a hoarder of memories, letting a valuable asset rot while she and her husband, Mark, were trying to build their future. The fight was ugly, ending with her storming out and leaving the silence behind her, now laced with the bitter poison of her resentment. For a week, that poison was all I had for company. Then, she returned. There was no angry phone call, no text message. Jessica simply appeared on my doorstep, holding a peace offering of coffee and pastries, her expression softened with a remorse that seemed almost genuine. She apologized profusely, tears welling in her eyes as she spoke of her stress, her worries, and how terribly she had behaved. She claimed losing her mother had made her terrified of losing me too, and her practicality had morphed into cruelty. My auditor's instincts, dormant since retirement, began to stir. The data points didn't align. This level of emotional reversal was an anomaly. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, pushing a thick manila envelope forward. "I want to make it right, Dad. I really do. This is for you." Inside, nestled in a sleek travel folder, were documents that took my breath away. Airline tickets, first class, to Honolulu. A 2-week reservation at a beachfront hotel in Waikiki, the kind Eleanor had circled in travel magazines for years, dreaming of a second honeymoon we never got to take. It was a gesture of such extravagant generosity that it felt more like a corporate buyout than a daughter's apology. "Jess, I can't accept this," I stammered, the sheer cost of it making my head spin. "You have to," she insisted, her hand covering mine. Her touch was cold. "You deserve it, for everything you've done. Go, relax, and forget I was ever so horrible." She left soon after, leaving me alone with the glossy brochures and the scent of expensive ink. I held the tickets in my hand, the weight of them feeling both thrilling and deeply unsettling. My mind, trained for 4 decades to spot inconsistencies and red flags, was running a frantic audit. The numbers, the emotions, the timing, none of it balanced. One week she wanted my house, the next she was giving me the world. Why the sudden 180-degree turn? The drive to Denver International was my first introduction to the new variable in this equation, my son-in-law Mark. He gripped the steering wheel of their sedan with a tension that seemed to defy the light morning traffic. His knuckles were white, his jaw set so tight I could see the muscles pulsing. In my 40 years of auditing tense executives, I knew this look. It wasn't excitement. It was the profound stress of someone trying to conceal a massive liability. Beside him, Jessica was the complete opposite, a flurry of forced cheerfulness. She chattered endlessly about the resort's amenities, the thread count of the sheets, the 5-star rating of the concierge. Her laughter was too frequent, too high-pitched. It was an asset thrown onto the books to distract from a glaring deficit. My mind started doing what it does best, running an audit. On one side of the ledger, I had Mark's silent, white-knuckled dread, a significant debit. On the other, Jessica's manic, bubbly enthusiasm, a fraudulent credit. The 2 entries didn't reconcile. A healthy emotional balance sheet for a family vacation should show shared excitement, maybe a little travel stress. This was something else entirely. This was the balance sheet of a company on the verge of collapse. "You two seem a little tense. I observed casually, my eyes on Mark in the rearview mirror. Jessica answered before he could even flinch. Not at all, Dad. Just so excited. It's been ages since we've had a real vacation, you know. Her response was too fast, a textbook attempt to bury a query under a pile of irrelevant data. The discrepancy became more pronounced at the airport. While Jessica handled the check-in process with a cool, managerial efficiency, Mark hovered nervously beside the luggage. He clutched a handsome black leather messenger bag to his chest like it contained state secrets. When the airline agent asked if he wanted to check it, he shook his head emphatically. "No, this stays with me," he said, his voice low and strained. Throughout the security screening, he never let it out of his sight. He'd place it on the conveyor belt at the last possible second and snatch it off the moment it emerged from the X-ray machine. It was an asset he was protecting with an intensity that far exceeded its apparent value. What was inside that bag that was so critical? As we waited at the gate, I mentally reviewed my findings. The conflicting emotional states, the unnaturally quick denial, the obsessive attachment to a single piece of luggage. None of these were criminal acts in themselves, but in the world of auditing, a cluster of such anomalies always points to a deeper, concealed problem. My initial suspicion about Jessica's financial motives was evolving. This felt bigger, more personal, more dangerous. The boarding call echoed through the terminal. As we lined up, Jessica gave my arm a squeeze, her smile perfectly crafted. "Ready for paradise, Dad?" I smiled back, a mask of paternal affection. More than ready. But as I stepped onto the jet bridge, I knew this wasn't a vacation. It was an audit. And I had a sinking feeling that if I didn't scrutinize every single transaction from this point forward, the final accounting would be catastrophic. The first hour of the flight was a masterclass in deception, both theirs and mine. They offered me champagne, which I accepted with a grateful smile. They chatted about the weather in Honolulu while I nodded along. Then, feigning fatigue from the early start, I leaned my head against the seat, closed my eyes, and regulated my breathing into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. But I wasn't sleeping. I was working. My reading glasses, perched on my nose, offered a slight magnification. The curved, polarized surface of the first-class window provided a distorted but usable reflection of the two people sitting beside me. It was a surveillance tool I'd learned to use decades ago during sensitive corporate negotiations. People become careless when they believe they are unobserved. After the flight attendants cleared the meal service, their hushed whispers began, almost lost in the drone of the engines. Mark was anxious. "Are you sure the package is secure? What if customs?" Jessica cut him off, her voice a low, sharp hiss. "It's fine. He's an old man on vacation. No one will look twice. Just stick to the schedule." My heart began a frantic, silent drumbeat against my ribs. Package, schedule. These were the words of logistics, of business, of projects with defined outcomes. My mind, the ever-present auditor, started a new file. "Everything has to be perfect for the final presentation," Jessica continued. "The scenario has to be flawless. If we just follow the schedule, this will be a memorable vacation for everyone." Scenario. Final presentation. The terms were chillingly familiar. In my world, a final presentation was the summary delivered after an audit was complete, when all the numbers were tallied and the fate of a company was sealed. A scenario was a projection, a plan to achieve a desired financial result. Then came the final, damning piece of data from Jessica. She leaned closer to Mark, and her whispered words sliced through the cabin noise straight into my soul. "Are you certain the package won't leave a trace?" That was it. The final entry that turned a suspicious ledger into an undeniable statement of fraud. My mind, in a flash of horrific clarity, translated their coded language. The package wasn't a gift. It was the contents of Mark's leather bag, a tool. The schedule wasn't an itinerary. It was a timeline for my death. The final presentation, the perfect scenario, that was my murder, staged to look like a natural event. And their memorable vacation was the life they would lead with my money after I was gone. Ice flooded my veins. This wasn't just about my house anymore. My daughter, my only child, was calmly discussing my execution at 35,000 feet. As the plane began its slow descent into the golden afternoon light of Honolulu, I forced myself to remain perfectly still. When the cheerful chime signaled our approach, I opened my eyes, blinked as if waking from a long nap, and turned to Jessica with a warm smile. "That was a lovely flight," I said. She smiled back, relieved. But behind my eyes, the audit was over. The conclusion was absolute. I was no longer on vacation with my family. I was in a war zone with the enemy. For 12 days, I lived inside a postcard and performed the role of a lifetime. I was Robert Mitchell, the grateful, carefree widower, finally getting his dream vacation. I smiled for photos at the luau, feigned wonder at the sea turtles while snorkeling, and laughed on cue at Jessica's carefully curated jokes. The scent of plumeria hung heavy in the air. The surf was a gentle, constant rhythm, and every sunset painted the sky in impossible colors. It was paradise. It was also a gilded cage, and I was sharing it with my executioners. My survival depended on my ability to continue my audit in plain sight. While I appeared to be relaxing, I was meticulously documenting their behavior. Mark was the most glaring liability on their balance sheet. The man was unraveling. He drank too much, his laughter was always a beat too late, and his hands had developed a persistent tremor. He was never without his black leather messenger bag, which he'd place on the table during meals as if it were a fourth member of our party. He was a walking manifestation of guilt, a massive red flag that only I, the intended victim, could see. Jessica, on the other hand, was the lead auditor of this grim project. She was cold, precise, and in complete control. I quickly noticed that she managed my consumption with the subtle diligence of a prison warden. At restaurants, she'd always order for me. "Oh, Dad loves his iced tea extra sweet, I'll tell the waiter," she'd say, waving the server away before I could speak. She planned our days with military precision, filling every moment with activities that left me with no time alone, no chance for an unplanned phone call or an unsupervised walk. One evening, as we sat on the hotel balcony watching the sun dip below the horizon, she placed a hand on my shoulder. Her touch felt like ice. "You look so relaxed, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured warmth. "This trip is good for you." I smiled, looking out at the ocean. "It's perfect, sweetheart." "Thank you." If she could have run an audit on my vital signs at that moment, she would have seen a heart rate that screamed pure terror. Every calorie I consumed, every sip of water I took, was a calculated risk. At night, when the sounds of the resort faded, I lay awake in my room, the performance over. My mind would race, turning the hotel layout into a schematic, calculating the distance to the emergency exits, analyzing the staff's shift changes. I was no longer planning a vacation. I was planning an escape. Every tourist map became a potential getaway route. Every cheerful aloha from a staff member was a potential plea for help I couldn't yet make. 12 days I played the part. 12 days I smiled at the woman plotting my death and the man who would deliver the final, fatal transaction. The performance was exhausting, the tension a physical weight. But now, the schedule was nearing its end. There was only one night left. I knew, with the chilling certainty of a final audit, that they would act tomorrow. That night, the tropical air felt thick, suffocating. I told them I was going for a short walk to admire the stars, a plausible excuse for a man my age. In reality, I needed to escape the confines of my hotel room, which had started to feel less like a luxury suite and more like a holding cell on death row. The resort grounds were quiet, lit by the soft glow of tiki torches. I found myself near the adults-only pool, a secluded oasis surrounded by dense, artfully arranged tropical foliage. And then I saw them. They were at a small, isolated table, their dark shapes silhouetted against the shimmering water. Their voices carried on the still night air, low but sharp with tension. I didn't think. I reacted. I slipped behind a massive bird of paradise bush, its large leaves providing perfect cover. It was Mark who was speaking, his voice ragged with a fear he could no longer conceal. "I don't know if I can do this, Jess. What if something goes wrong? What if they investigate?" Jessica's reply was devoid of any sympathy. It was the cold, incisive voice of a CEO reprimanding a failing subordinate. "I can't believe you're getting weak at the last minute, Mark. We've planned this for months. Are you really going to throw away $1 million because you're nervous? This isn't a business deal. It's a solution, she snapped. He's old. He's miserable. We're giving him a peaceful exit in paradise. Now stop panicking and listen. I held my breath, my knuckles digging into the damp soil. This was it, the final, missing file in my audit. Tomorrow night, at the farewell dinner, Jessica instructed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You order the wine, the expensive Bordeaux he likes. When you pour, you make sure his glass is turned away from the table, just 2 drops from the vial. That's all it takes. My blood ran cold. The package was a vial. It's from your lab. You said it yourself, she pressed. Odorless, tasteless. It mimics the effects of a massive cardiac arrest. With his age and the recent stress of Eleanor's death, no doctor in the world will question it. It will look exactly like a heart attack. There it was. The entire methodology, laid bare under the Hawaiian stars. Method, poison. Timing, tomorrow's dinner. Execution, 2 drops in my wine. The audit was complete. The evidence was irrefutable. And the sentence, if I didn't act, was death. I didn't hear the rest of their conversation. My mind was a whirlwind of pure adrenaline. I had to get away. I backed away from the bush with the silence of a man who has spent his life noticing small details, my feet finding soft grass instead of crackling leaves. Every step back towards my room was a step away from the grave they had prepared for me. I fumbled with my key card, my hand shaking uncontrollably. Once inside, I slid the security latch into place and leaned against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I finally had all the information, and I had less than 24 hours to use it. The escape begins now. There was no sleep. There was only the cold, clear certainty of action. At 4:45 a.m. in the pre-dawn stillness of the resort, I packed a single carry-on bag with my essentials. Passport, wallet, medications. The rest, the ridiculously bright Hawaiian shirts, the souvenirs I left behind like the skin of a former life. I scribbled a note on hotel stationery, my handwriting deliberately shaky. Urgent call from the bank. Major fraud on my accounts. Must catch the first flight home. So sorry to ruin the last day. Will explain everything. Love, Dad. It was the perfect lie. Plausible, panic-inducing, and aimed directly at their greed. I slipped it under their adjoining door and walked away without looking back. The first flight to Denver departed at 6:15 a.m. I paid for my taxi and my ticket in cash, creating a temporary dead end in the financial paper trail I knew Jessica would eventually try to follow. The 6 hours in the air were not for rest. They were for wargaming. My mind, stripped of all emotion, became a pure instrument of logic. I outlined my strategy on a cocktail napkin, a flowchart of survival and justice. The 36-hour clock had started the moment I left the hotel. I landed in Denver at 3:30 p.m. local time, the familiar, dry, cool air a welcome shock after the humidity of my would-be tomb. The moment I was inside a taxi, my phone was in my hand. I didn't call the police, not yet. I called the one man whose discretion was as ironclad as his legal knowledge. David, it's Robert Mitchell. I need to see you. Now. David Chen, my estate lawyer for 20 years, was a man who rarely sounded surprised. Robert? I thought you were in Hawaii. Is everything all right? No, I said, my voice flat. I'll be at your office in 30 minutes. Clear your schedule. He must have heard the steel in my tone because he simply said, I'll be waiting. I walked into his downtown office looking like a man who had just returned from paradise but felt like he'd crawled out of a grave. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. David, I need you to draft a new will. Immediately, I stated, sitting opposite him at his large mahogany desk. He raised an eyebrow. A new will? Robert, we just updated yours 8 months ago after Eleanor. This is an emergency revocation and replacement, I cut in. I am disinheriting Jessica, completely. Every penny, every asset, the house, the investments, all of it. He leaned back, his professional calm finally cracking. All of it? May I ask why? This is significant. My reasons are my own. and they are not open for discussion, I said, leaving no room for argument. I want my entire estate, upon my death, to be transferred to the Children's Hospital Foundation. No ambiguity, no loopholes. Can you make it ironclad, and can you do it in the next 24 hours? David stared at me, the mind of a veteran lawyer assessing the situation. He saw not a grieving old man, but a client with absolute, unshakable resolve. He nodded slowly. It will be legally bulletproof. I'll have it ready for your signature by tomorrow afternoon. I stood up, my part in this transaction finished. Thank you, David. As I walked out of his office, the downtown Denver skyline seemed sharper, clearer. Step 1 of the audit was complete. The clock was ticking. Now, it was time to prepare the trap. The 12 hours I had left were the most critical. Back in the sanctuary of my home, I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in months. The first order of business was surveillance. I opened my laptop and ordered a set of 4 wireless smart home cameras, the kind that were no bigger than a golf ball, selecting the city's premium 4-hour express delivery option. Time was a luxury I could not afford. While I waited, I walked through the house, not as a homeowner, but as a forensic accountant seeking the perfect vantage points to document a crime. The living room camera went on the highest shelf of the bookcase, tucked between a thick biography of Churchill and a dusty encyclopedia. The kitchen camera was nestled behind Eleanor's antique spice rack, its tiny black lens almost invisible against the dark wood. But the most important one was for the dining room. I placed it on the sideboard, partially obscured by a photo of Eleanor and me on our wedding day. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire table, specifically of my chair. When the cameras arrived, I worked with the focused intensity of a man defusing a bomb. The technology was surprisingly intuitive. I synced all 4 devices to an app on my phone, my fingers, usually stiff with age, moving with nimble precision. I tested each feed, adjusting angles by a millimeter, checking the clarity of the audio pickup. On my phone screen, my quiet, empty house was now a complete surveillance grid. I was ready to record. The final step was the most delicate. I took a deep breath and dialed the non-emergency number for the Denver Police Department. When a calm, professional voice answered, I matched her tone. "My name is Robert Mitchell," I began. "I'm a retired forensic auditor. I have reason to believe that a significant fraudulent act, with the potential for severe personal harm, is scheduled to take place at my residence tomorrow evening, around 7 p.m. There was a pause. "Sir, can you be more specific about the fraudulent act?" the sergeant asked, her voice tinged with professional skepticism. "I can't disclose the full details over the phone," I said, choosing my words with an auditor's precision. "But I have been tracking certain discrepancies, and my analysis indicates a high probability of criminal intent. I am not in immediate danger now, but I will be tomorrow." "I'm not asking for intervention, Sergeant. I'm asking for observation. I need a patrol unit to be within a 5-minute radius of my house tomorrow night. When I call you, you will have all the evidence you need." My calm, logical presentation, devoid of panic or hysteria, seemed to have an effect. She took my details, verified my identity, and after a moment of consideration, she agreed. A car would be nearby. I hung up, a wave of profound relief washing over me. All the pieces were in place. The legal firewall, the digital witnesses, the official presence. The trap was set. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Jessica. I answered, my voice a perfect imitation of a loving father. "Hi, sweetheart." "Dad!" Her voice was bright, cheerful, and utterly oblivious. "Just wanted to let you know, we've landed. We're grabbing the bags now. See you at home for that special dinner." "I'm looking forward to it," I said, my voice steady as stone. "Drive safe." When the doorbell rang at 7 sharp, I smoothed my apron and composed my face into a mask of benign paternal warmth. Jessica swept in, all smiles and perfume, while Mark shuffled behind her, clutching his black leather bag. The atmosphere was thick with false pleasantries. "It smells wonderful in here, Dad," Jessica chirped, her eyes already scanning the dining room I had set with Eleanor's best china. "I hope you're hungry," I replied, leading them to the table. I turned to my son-in-law. Mark, would you do the honors? It's that expensive Bordeaux Eleanor loved. It feels right to open it for a special family celebration. His face paled slightly, but he nodded. This was my calculated move. The perfect excuse to leave him alone with the wine and the glasses. I just need to finish up the sauce, I announced cheerfully, before retreating to the kitchen. But I wasn't cooking. I propped my phone against the ceramic canister on the counter. The screen split into 4 silent, high-definition squares. My focus was on one, the dining room. I watched as Mark, believing he was unobserved, set about his work. His movements were jerky, inefficient. He glanced nervously toward the kitchen doorway. Then, his hand dipped into the black leather bag. The vial was tiny, almost invisible in his trembling fingers. He uncapped it. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. I watched, my auditor's mind dispassionately recording the transaction. He tilted the vial over my wine glass, the one at the head of the table. 1 drop, 2 drops. The clear liquid merged invisibly with the wine. The evidence was now captured, time-stamped, and stored securely in the cloud. He pocketed the vial and proceeded to uncork the bottle with an exaggerated flourish of normalcy. I took a steadying breath and returned to the dining room carrying the platter of salmon. I placed it on the table, a centerpiece in a macabre play. Mark poured the wine, his hand surprisingly steady now that the deed was done. He slid my glass, the poisoned one, towards me. Jessica raised her glass, her eyes shining with a predatory light. A toast, she declared, to family and to new beginnings. Absolutely, I agreed, lifting my own glass. I held it high, watching their faces over the rim. I saw the flash of triumph in Jessica's eyes, the beads of sweat on Mark's brow. They thought they had won. Then, slowly, deliberately, I set my glass down on the table, untouched. The smiles on their faces faltered. A flicker of confusion appeared. Actually, I said, my voice calm and even, before we celebrate, I thought I'd share a few interesting balance sheets I put together while I was in Hawaii. Their confusion deepened, now tinged with alarm. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto theirs, the loving father replaced by the forensic auditor. The first balance sheet is a cost-benefit analysis of a one-way trip. The color drained from Jessica's face. Mark looked like he was about to be physically sick. They knew. In that single terrifying moment, they knew the audit was complete, and they had been caught. The silence in the room was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Jessica recovered first, her survival instincts kicking in. She forced a laugh, a brittle, ugly sound. Dad, what are you talking about? A one-way trip? You're not making any sense. Maybe you're just tired from your flight back. Am I? I asked softly. I reached for my phone, my movements slow and deliberate. Let's review the preliminary findings. I tapped the screen, and a recording filled the room, the hushed, poolside conversation from Hawaii, the sound of crickets chirping underneath their venomous words. 2 drops from the vial. Mimics the effects of a massive cardiac arrest. No doctor in the world will question it. Jessica's face was a mask of practiced outrage. That's absurd. You twisted our words. We were talking about a movie plot. A movie plot, I repeated, my voice flat. An interesting defense. But that audit was for past liabilities. I looked at her, my gaze as cold as a bank vault. This one is for current events. I swiped the screen. That was the past. This is the present. I turned the phone around for them to see. The video began to play. The angle from the sideboard was perfect, crystal clear. They watched themselves in silent, horrifying miniature. Mark glancing nervously toward the kitchen, his hand disappearing into the black bag, the tiny vial emerging. They watched as he carefully, deliberately, administered 2 drops of clear liquid into my wine glass. My wine glass sitting right there on the table between us, a gleaming chalice of death. That's what broke them. Mark made a choked, guttural sound and sank into his chair, covering his face with his hands. He was a spent asset, a total write-off. Jessica didn't make a sound. She just stared at the screen, her calculating mind finally encountering a number it couldn't fudge, a reality it couldn't spin. The video was an irrefutable, absolute truth. She was bankrupt. With my thumb, I pressed the pre-dialed number on my phone, a single, silent command. Then I waited. Less than 2 minutes later, a firm, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. Jessica flinched as if she'd been shot. I remained seated as uniformed officers entered the dining room, their presence filling the space with an immediate and final gravity. A calm, steady sergeant led the way. "Jessica and Mark," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation, "you are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder." As one officer read them their rights, another, a technician in gloves, approached the table. He carefully photographed my wine glass before sealing it in an evidence bag. He did the same with the vial he retrieved from a stunned Mark's pocket. The process was quiet, professional, and methodical. It was a perfect audit. Jessica tried one last time, her voice shrill with desperation. "You can't do this. He's a confused old man." The sergeant just looked at her. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. All the evidence has been recorded." The metallic click of handcuffs was the final sound in the ledger, the closing entry. As they were led away, the door closed behind them, and the house was plunged back into silence. But this time, it wasn't the silence of grief. It was the clean, clear, perfect silence of a balanced book. The wheels of justice, I discovered, turn much like a corporate audit, slowly, methodically, but with an unforgiving finality. The trial, held 3 months later, was a brief and brutal affair. My evidence was the star witness. The high-definition video of Mark poisoning my wine was played for a silent, horrified jury. The audio recording of their poolside chat sealed their fate. Jessica's attempts to portray me as a senile, paranoid old man crumbled under the weight of such cold, hard data. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Jessica was sentenced to 20 years for conspiracy and solicitation of murder. Mark received 15. The accounts were settled. A week later, I sat once more in David Chen's office. The final paperwork for my new will lay on his desk. It was a thick document, detailing the transfer of the Mitchell family estate worth over $2 million to the Children's Hospital Foundation upon my death. My daughter had been willing to kill for that number. Now it would be used to save lives. David looked at me as I prepared to sign, his expression one of quiet respect. "Are you sure, Robert? There's no going back from this." "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied. My signature on the document was firm and clear. It wasn't an act of anger or revenge. It was an act of reallocation. I was moving an asset from a column of toxic liability to one of profound, life-affirming growth. That evening, I sat in my favorite leather armchair in the living room, the same room that had once echoed with Jessica's cruel demands. The house was quiet again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the heavy, grief-laden silence that had followed Eleanor's passing. It was a peaceful, clean silence. The silence of a ledger that has been perfectly, finally, balanced. I poured myself a small glass of the fine Bordeaux from a new, unopened bottle and swirled the deep red liquid, watching it catch the lamplight. My eyes drifted to the photograph of Eleanor on the mantelpiece, her smile as warm and bright as I remembered. I raised my glass to her. "Well, Eleanor," I whispered, the words spoken only to her and to the quiet peace of the room. "The final balance sheet is balanced. The debt has been paid, and the assets have been invested where they belong." I took a sip. The wine was rich and smooth, with no trace of bitterness. Outside, the lights of Denver twinkled in the clear, cold night. For the first time in a very long time, I felt no fear, no anger, only a deep and abiding sense of peace. My legacy would not be a house or a stock portfolio passed to a daughter consumed by greed. It would be the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had taken the worst kind of betrayal and transformed it into the best kind of hope. In the final accounting of our lives, the numbers that truly matter aren't found in a bank statement, but in the legacy we leave behind. Betrayal, especially from family, can feel like a debt that can never be repaid. It creates a deficit in the soul that no amount of anger or revenge can truly fill. But I learned that the most powerful transaction you can make is to convert that liability into an asset. By choosing justice over personal vengeance, by transforming an inheritance meant to fund greed into a foundation for hope, the books are not just balanced, they show a profit of immeasurable value. True wealth isn't what you own, it's what you give back when you have every reason to give up. The pain of what my daughter did will likely never fade completely, but it no longer defines my days. Peace came not from her punishment, but from my own choice to create a better ending to my story, an ending Eleanor would have been proud of. It's a quiet peace, found in the knowledge that while one chapter of my family ended in darkness, the final chapter will help bring light to children who need it most. We all face moments where the numbers don't seem to add up. What did you think of the final balance sheet in this story? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories where justice finds a way.